What's up, everyone? Welcome to Our Voice Podcast, Desmond and Neil Show. I said Desmond first this time, right? Because Neil is not here, so I get to do it any way I want to do it, and Neil can't check me for it. So, Neil, guess what? I'm running this show today, and I want to welcome everybody to it. We're going to have a great show today, but once again, you know, this podcast is always about elevating the voices of people who are directly impacted by our justice system. We know that we got friends and allies with all kinds of degrees and everything on the wall. They're experts, but guess what? We are the subject matter experts, and we have a voice, and this podcast is dedicated to elevating the voices of people just like me and my homie Neil and so many other great people across this country. We want to make sure that our voices are heard when we're talking about policy, when we talk about democracy, when we talk about world issues, right? Or even issues that our country is facing. People who have been impacted by the criminal justice system got to say in this, and this podcast makes it happen. So welcome back. Listen, if you're watching this right now, hey, tell your mama, tell your baby mama, your baby daddy, your wife, your husband, your friend. Tell them to get on the platform and check out this podcast because it's going to be fire today. Listen, Neil is not here, so we get to wild out a little bit. We don't have to be as strict and stuffy like when Neil is on there. We gonna get loose. I got two bosses with me on this show today, and it's going down. But before we get to our guests, you know, I just want to say that, number one, we've seen a lot of things going on in our country, things that can get us down and depressed or get us jaded and just want to just give up in advocacy or give up in even trying to live the American dream, right? And I know that these things could wear on our psyche, but listen, I'm here to tell you that in spite of anything that's going on in this country, right, there is a bright spot. I'm telling you, I know it. We're living it every day. And in spite, even here in Florida, in spite of what's going on, man, we are finding great stories. Man, just the other week, we had a 305 Expo and Resource Fair. Man, we were expecting maybe about 200-300 people. Man, 1,300 people came through. Some people came in off the streets, were homeless, and before they left, they had a place to live and a job offer. Right, that's what we do. People came in, driver's license suspended, couldn't even vote. Before they left, man, not only did they get their fines and fees paid, they were able to get their driver's license cleared, and guess what? Get their license back, and now they're able to not just vote, but they're able to thrive. They're able to even start their own business. They're able to get better jobs and stuff because they can travel. And so there's always good things happening, right? And sometimes all of the negative things tend to overwhelm us, but there are good things out there that gives me hope that there is a breakthrough along the way. One of the things that a friend told me a long time ago was that, the matter of fact, she asked me, she said, Desmond, you know when is the darkest part of night? And I couldn't figure it out. And then she finally told me it's right before dawn. The darkest part of night is right before dawn. And so while you might be seeing this doom and gloom, just know that dawn is right around the corner. And you just got to hold on, stay the course, and know that something better is coming. It's get greater later. That's how we used to say it back in the days. It get greater later. But enough of that, you know, soliloquy and me going off script and all that. Listen, want to give a huge shout out to our amazing production team, right? It used to be ZB Productions. Now it's ZBK Productions, right? We got Zay, we got Brandon, and we got Kenyatta, right? That's helping to put together this show. Shout out to them for making this thing happen. I got the best production team in the world, and you know what? They even shine brighter when Neil is not here, y'all. Don't tell Neil this, right? But they was on point, man. They had offered donuts and wings for the guests. When Neil is here, we don't get nothing but water, right? But when Neil wasn't, man, they offered us a spread, right? Of course, I turned it down, but they offered us that spread. Listen, Today we got a great show. Like I said, we got two bosses in the house, two amazing women who I've known for quite a number of years, and they're representing an organization that has been a friend of Florida Rights Restoration Coalition and an ally of our organization for quite some time. The organization is named Demos. It's like a Uber think tank and all kinds of good stuff around democracy, and they just bring people together and they just try to figure out with everybody else how to make this world a better place for everyone, how to make our democracy more vibrant. And I was fortunate enough that they happened to be in Orlando today and agreed to come in studio and hang out with me. And I told them, yeah, Neil ain't here, so y'all can really come. And they were like, they jumped to it, and they're here, right? And so I know that my production team has told me, don't be using paper. But let me tell you, Kira and Carol, right? I mean, listen, I could just tell you some things off the top of my head, but man, these things that they have done, these women have done, is really impressive. And I do not want to do a disservice, all right, to the work that they have put in, right, to the struggle that they have gone through, right, and the hours that they have committed to not only just making themselves a better individual, but to prepare themselves to be a greater servant, all right, to our public. So I want to just go down this list. Of course, we have on my right here the one and only Dr. Right? We call her Doctor. What's up, Doc? Dr. Carol Lautier. Right, she's the director of movement building at Demos. She was at first a faith work coordinator and a senior faith fellow at the National LGBTQ Task Force. Right, National LGBTQ Task Force for about 6 years. She have a bachelor's in women's studies from the University of Nakalaka at Chapel Hill. We know that we got some big time Duke fans around here, but we're gonna go ahead and we'll go ahead and allow this Tar Heel to be in this space for a little bit, right? She was a Robeson Fellow at the Institute for Research in Africa, in African American Studies at Columbia University, where she earned a master's, right, in African American Studies, and she earned her Ph.D. That's why we have to call her doctor now, in American Studies from George Washington University. What's up, Doc?
Good to be here, Desmond. Thank you.
And then we have Kira Romero-Craft, like Laura Craft of like the Tomb Raider side. She is just that adventurous. She is just that daring. She's just that bold when it comes to fighting for people's rights. When it comes to fighting for justice, she's just like Laura Tomb Raider Craft, right? That would face all kinds of danger and would not shirk from the responsibility of defending democracy and defending justice. But that's Kira Romero. She is the director of legal strategies at Demos, right? And she used to be the director of the Southeast region of the Latino Justice, right? Formerly the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. And so, yes, some of her fighting spirit she gets because she got some Puerto Rican background up in her, and she would throw down in a minute, right, for justice. And then she also served as the director for children's legal program at Americans for Immigrant Justice. What's up, Kira?
Oh, it's great to be here, Desmond. It's been too long.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's going on with you all? I mean, what's happening with you all today?
I think today what's most prominent for me is that there's so much that people are dealing with right now. A lot feels overwhelming and discouraging. And I think to what you said earlier, this is a moment actually of opportunity. It's a reminder, right, that as you said, there are good, powerful stories that you're learning about. But when we focus on the people who are closest to the problem and shift power to them, that then creates the opportunity for us to have a democracy and an economy that works for all of us. So I'm really grateful for the work that FRRC continues to do, the way that you center folks and tell those stories that give hope to so many.
Well, let me tell you, Carol. One of the things that we have said, like from the very beginning, I remember we even got a little controversial during our Amendment 4 efforts. I remember telling folks that, listen, we're fighting just as hard for that returning citizen that want to vote for Donald Trump as we were for the returning citizen that wished he could have voted for President Barack Obama, right? And I remember even after passing Amendment 4, and we're telling folks, listen, FRC, we don't lean left, we don't lean right, we lean straight forward into the issues that impact people with felony convictions, right? And we were committed to placing people over politics, right? And that's been our North Star from day one. But there's a lot of things that inform on our position, right? And so I know today we're going to be, one of the topics I want to talk with you all about is about, people use the word voter suppression, right? I like to use democracy suppression, right? But there's some, we're going to get into a couple issues that happen here in Florida about that. But, one of the things that we looked at, because when we talk about, voter suppression and these laws that we're seeing pop up, all over the country, one of the things I've always said was that, voter suppression is a symptom of probably something much deeper, right? And where we landed at was that the deeper issue was, since this country was formed, there's always been a group of politicians who wanted to pick and choose who got to vote for them, as opposed to letting the people pick and choose who are their public servants, right? And how, it was not too long ago that women wasn't even allowed to vote, right? That there were a group of politicians that believed that women should not have a voice, and they believed it so strongly that they used to physically beat women and throw them in prisons, all because a woman said that if I live here, I should have a voice, I should have a say on how my community is being ran. Listen, women did not get the right to vote. Like I said, it's just been a few years, right? And so when I look at that and I think about how, even during the Jim Crow era, right, that there were people who didn't think that people like me should be able to vote, right? And here's the thing, right? Back then, there were Democrats, right? Today, people are looking at Republicans, right? And if you were to just pop up in this country today, you would think, oh, Republicans have always been against people voting, right? When the reality is that you can actually, both sides have a share of blame. And right, and then when you look at the both sides in the political systems, and that's why I'm coming to you, Carol, is that we realize that some of this exasperation of these political parties and some of the exasperations of the division that we're facing is because that there is some ills within the democracy itself, right? Whether it's money in politics, right? Whether it's the two-party system that is just eating each other up, right? And there's no other option. There's so many other things that I think play a role in it. And so I want to ask both of y'all, anyone of y'all could jump in on this, right? Is that how do we talk more broadly as it relates to creating a more inclusive democracy, or creating a world, or creating a country where if you live in a community, you should have a say in how your community is being ran?
So I'm happy to, jump in. One of the things that I think we are failing in this country is a shared narrative around democracy and voting specifically. I think, I have been mulling over this, through our work. I have an amazing thought partner in Carol and colleague and someone who I'm working with on these issues, and I'm thrilled to be at Demos. I've just recently celebrated my 3-month mark here. But one of the things that I've come back to is, how did we get here? How is it that, this disinformation campaign that everyone talks about and people can point to and give examples about. But how is it that we have, Americans from similar backgrounds talking about two completely different things when related to one issue? We could talk about vaccines. One side is getting their news from X. If you tell me where you get your news, I can probably guess what party you're supporting, what party you're affiliated to. And it has struck me that I think it started sort of when we have an amazing array of options now as to where to get our news. I understand that Facebook is probably Facebook, YouTube, all of these other methods of
Twitter.
getting our news, Twitter.
Yes.
Whereas, it used to be all folks would gather around the television and we would all watch the same newscasters, and they would, the attempt was to be objective. Obviously, that doesn't work all the time. But now we have so many different streams of getting news that I think it has really caused this fracture of understanding, of a shared understanding of an American narrative, if you will. And that has created, for organizations like Demos, a huge gap in terms of how do you have a shared narrative to the folks that you're speaking to. And at Demos, I would say one of the principles is that we're always talking to the people. We may work on different, policy things. We may work with litigators. Lawyers have their own language and lawyers have a way of talking. But at the end of the day, I would say that one of the principles that I think we adhere to at Demos is that, the ultimate folks that we're trying to reach are the people. And so how do we have a shared dialogue and a language, and the organizations that we work with as well, around democracy and these principles that I think should be bedrock to our society and the way that we move government.
So what suggestions do you all have about how do you find this shared narrative, right? Because one of the things that, I think that we've been able to successfully do with FRC is find that shared narrative among returning citizens, right? It doesn't matter if that returning citizen is black, white, Spanish, or, if they're conservative or if they're, progressive, or probably none of the above, right? All that matters is the fact that they've been impacted by the criminal justice system, and we're able to talk to all of them in just one voice. How do you do that around democracy when there's so much division there?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, Des. I mean, Demos, the name of our organization, is actually the root word of the word democracy, and it means the people. And so in the same way that you focused on people who are most impacted, I think that's actually the way forward for our democracy. Returning to interest and support for working families, people at every level of our society, and really reinvesting in jobs, in education, and reinforcing this idea of the common good. I feel like that's been lost in the divisions in our country. We need to remember that we actually need all of us to make this country work. And so for that reason, it seems like there's an opportunity for us to remember that we all want our kids to go to safe schools. We all want folks to have jobs that not only provide a decent wage, but benefits that help them take care of their families when they're sick. We want folks to have affordable housing, right? Like, all of those things actually make all of us safer. And so when we care for those who are most marginalized, we actually make a country, create a country, an economy, a democracy that is strong and creates an opportunity for us to thrive in ways that, have been unimaginable in prior.
Kara, you sound like you've been sitting in on one of our organizing meetings, right? Because we talk about how the chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and that applies to our society. And, I think the best way to strengthen our society is to strengthen the segments of society that's been most weakened by various systems, whether it's discrimination or, racism or whatever, that if we can strengthen those that have been most weakened, then everybody benefits from that. And we believe that the people that's been most weakened in our society has been returning citizens, right? We face barriers to democracy, we face barriers to economic mobility, and then we have to fight against this narrative that basically dehumanizes us, right? And so, we're totally aligned with that. But what I'm interested in is where did this passion come from that you have?
I grew up Pentecostal in Eastern North Carolina, and my beliefs about what's fair, what's just, come from the church. And so no matter how I tried to learn, other things and other ways of approaching life, that bedrock sense that we are all loved by God, that we are all deserving of love, and that we need each other to create a community that is what Dr. King called the beloved community, where all of us have a place and a voice. That is where that comes from for me, and the belief that ultimately there is power and knowledge that I can learn from, like my great aunts and grandmothers, right, who did not finish school, did not have formal education, but were guided by a sense of love and duty to family that created opportunities that allow me to be here today. So when I think about a healthy democracy and what we're working toward, I really do. It's not just lip service, right? I really do believe that whether you are someone with a Ph.D. or someone with no D, or someone who is knocking on doors or in whatever your
field.
With a
felony conviction?
With a felony conviction, absolutely.
We still welcome?
You are not just welcome. I think there's an opportunity for us to learn how to do democracy different when we center those who have been directly impacted, right? And so that's my impetus for this work, and one of the reasons I really appreciate being able to work with colleagues like Kira.
What about you, Kara? Where did your passion come from?
I'm an immigrant, so my mom and my dad were the only ones who migrated to this country, and we were welcomed by strangers.
Wow.
So that to me is what I remember and what I think about every time I get tired. Yeah.
Wow. So that, when you have something, I believe when you have something personal to just like hold on to, right, that could be your source of energy, right, to do the work, right, that you're doing. And so what are your views? I mean, at the end of the day, we got, in Florida, we're here in Florida, and we know that, at one point, Florida was one of 4 states that disenfranchised its folks, actually for life. Thank God that we were able to pass Amendment 4. But there's still this debate in the country about people with felony convictions being able to participate in democracy, right? And it's not necessarily a debate about whether or not they deserve to, even though that's a smaller debate. The bigger debate is, should they be able to do it when they're incarcerated? Should they be able to do it when they're released? And then, of course, the case here, should they be able to do it only after they have paid any outstanding legal financial obligations? What's your thoughts on that?
So I do want to clarify something, Desmond. I am not Puerto Rican.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to tell me that because you were like,
you're trying to trip me up.
Yeah.
No, I am not. I did work for, very proud to have worked and served at Latino Justice Puebla. I am not Puerto Rican, although I have a strong commitment to Puerto Rican community and my own family who, I have Puerto Rican family.
Well, let me just say, at the end of the day, that's what I get for not following the lead of my production team, especially our research director, Brandon, because I know he's always on point. He was able to connect the dots even with Rollins College, right? But when I would go off on my own, without guidance from my man Brandon, I could make those mistakes.
Well,
so that's my apologies on that.
I totally get that. But the reason that I mentioned that is because I think we should be like Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico, you can vote from jail, and I think a couple of states in the United States you can do that as
Maine
well.
and Vermont.
Maine and Vermont.
Yep.
But I believe that, even looking at some of the work that Demos has done in support of a right to vote constitutional amendment, that there should be no qualification as to any carceral penalty that you may have and may have impacted you, or whether current, past, present, it doesn't matter, in my opinion, because what would you be afraid of? I think that every single person deserves the right to vote. I like to think of it as, if I was lost in the woods and it was myself and 3 or 4 other people, and we designated a leader to help us find our way out. I'm a city girl, so I would need that help, right? I would want to be able to say, to have an influence in how we decided to get ourselves out. If we had to ration food, if we had to make decisions about shelter. And I think the same applies to anyone who lives in this country. It extends beyond citizenship, and that's my personal view, not a Demos view. But I will say that in terms of a criminal background, I don't think that there should be any qualification to voting. And so as it relates to that, and I think a lot of it is socializing and educating. Voter education, I think, is a huge gap in this country, where especially folks who are we like to use the term new Americans, but they have no concept of Jim Crow laws. They did not live that. They did not experience that. And although we as Americans now enjoy the privileges and benefits of that extremely grueling work, and that work is constant, I think that there is a real commitment on organizations like Demos and organizations like FRRC to engage new Americans, to engage folks who don't know about the civil rights movement and don't know how that applies today, because the narrative has been such that folks now think that voting is a privilege and a luxury that is only afforded to a few, and that's terrifying in my opinion. And I think it's a calling to really try to invest into that in a way that's not only meaningful, that builds power for impacted individuals, for folks who have returning citizens, but also any folks who cannot vote, right? Undocumented folks, folks who are lacking shelter. I think that that's just so critically important at this time, that the thought of calling people in like you did through Amendment 4, I think is really something that's compelling, and that for folks who have done this work for a long time, you have to sit down and sort of think about like how are we strategizing to make the most of that opportunity, if opportunities exist. And it seems like some days it's a little bit harder to find those, but.
And how does that show up in your work that you're doing now for Demos?
Well, I mean, I am very much, I'm in a fortunate position that I get to work with brilliant people like Carol, that we're working through those issues internally.
She is a doctor.
She is a doctor.
She is
for
a
sure.
doctor.
And I can hear her any day of the week. Her voice is beautiful. So I think you found somebody that deserves to be on the podcast. But not only her voice, but what she's saying. But I think the bottom line is that there's a lot of thought partnership that we have to do in planning and strategizing. Unfortunately, we find ourselves now in the movement in a sort of reactionary position with everything that's happening, overturning of Roe decision that just happened last Friday, all of these different decisions that are coming down.
No, we're gonna get into that on the second half, of the show. We're definitely gonna dive into that.
Sure. And just as a caveat, I am not a reproductive justice rights expert, but I definitely have feelings and thoughts around this. But, we are at Demos at this time, we're continuing on in the work that we do in the democracy space and economic justice. But we are also centering the movement and centering impacted individuals and figuring out the best way to move with them. I mean, my background, as you know, Desmond, as a community lawyer, has been, I take my marching orders from the organizing community. If they say, Kira, we want to litigate, that's where, that's how we're moving. But this time really presents an opportunity to be more strategic about how we're thinking about doing things. And also, I think one of the key issues for folks like myself who have had experience litigating is providing the tools to the community who are going to be impacted. Win or lose, there's still opportunities that come after litigation, sort of like a wake, and we have to figure out how to be ready for that and prepare, win or lose, what are we going to do after that? So that's where we're at Demos.
Carol, what about you? I mean, what does your day look like?
My day looks like checking in with our state and national partners, being in conversation with folks who are in this fight with us. One of the things that I remember from your Amendment 4, the Amendment 4 work that you all led here, is you talked about engaging folks who could not vote and having them reach out to family members and community members, right? So even folks who were low propensity voters and no propensity voters were inclined to exercise their right to vote on behalf of people that could not. And that it remains a really compelling example to me that there's a role for all of us. You know, even if you can't register to vote because of immigration status, for example, there is still a critical role for you to play in creating a community and a city and a state and a country, right, that provides opportunities to all of us. So in that regard, my work focusing on supporting the work of state partners, inclusive and folks in the Inclusive Democracy Project and others.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I was getting ready. Well, not really glad you mentioned it, right? Because you just destroyed one of my lines I was about to close out the segment with, right?
Okay.
Because I was about to say I wanted to close out the segment with this one question. You down with IDP?
You know me.
That's right. So what is the IDP?
The Inclusive Democracy Project is a national cohort of grassroots leaders, mostly grassroots leaders of color. Currently, we're in 17 states and the District of Columbia. We just completed our national convening, the first in person since the COVID pandemic. And it's an opportunity for folks to strategize together, for folks in Florida to learn what folks in Washington State have done successfully, to share best practices, and to also feel less alone in a very challenging political moment. And DEMOS is able to support the work that's happening in states, not only in convening folks, but also we've offered research support. We've been able to, under the leadership of folks on the legal team, been able to help folks with various cases. And we're proud to do that in a way that actually supports the leadership of folks in states and not coming in as a national organization with all the answers. We actually partner with people in a real way and trust your expertise and the work that you're doing and your strategic vision. And we try to align ourselves with that and support you in achieving your goals.
That's what's up. That's what's up. So listen, we're going to close out this segment, but our next segment coming on, listen, we talking Gainesville and we talking Roe v. Wade, right? That we going to get down in the nitty gritty and see how we can make sense of all this madness that's happening in the state of Florida and in this country. That sounds cool?
All right.
All right. So you down with IDP?
You know me.
All right. That's what's up.
You know that we are the voices.
Hey, everybody. So we're back with Kira Romero-Craft and Dr. Carol Lautier. All right. The dynamic duo from DEMOS, an amazing organization that's based in New York, Florida. Having a great conversation. And listen, I want to just jump right in it. You know, a few weeks ago, I got a news article and folks was like DMing me and sending me all kinds of texts that there were 10 people who were charged with voter fraud, either registering to vote illegally or voting illegally in the Gainesville area in Alachua County. And the story was that these 10 individuals at one point were incarcerated in the local county jail, right? And apparently they were awaiting whatever disposition of whatever charge they might have been in the jail for. And while they were in the jail, a local supervisor of elections went in the jail and engaged them in the effort to register people to vote. Because they're thinking that if a person is in jail, they have not been convicted of the crime that lands them in jail, that they are still eligible to register to vote, right? Because they have not been convicted yet, and therefore don't have a felony conviction. I don't know what the supervisor of election was thinking, because there were people that probably already had felony convictions. But anyway, this supervisor of elections employee went in the jail and convinced a bunch of people in the jail to register to vote. And this happened in 2020. Fast forward 2 years to now 2022, someone, did some research and figured out that some of the people should not have been registered, or some of the people should not have voted. And they filed a complaint. And the next thing you know, it went all the way up to FDLE, and FDLE investigated, submitted their report, and then the local state attorney decided to charge 10 of these individuals with illegally voting. Now, I'm going to tell you, I was a lot disturbed when this happened. We actually even held a press conference, I think, a week later. And one of the main things that we highlighted in this press conference was the fact that these individuals relied on the supervisor of elections, right, to determine whether or not they're able to vote. Because if the supervisor of election come to them and say, hey, you can vote or you can register to vote, and somebody does that, they're relying on like a state official as to whether, what their voting status is, and then have someone else come behind that and charge these people with voting, I think is a travesty. And it really speaks to how much work we still have to do in Florida around Amendment 4 and its implementation, especially when we know we passed Amendment 4. The Florida legislature passed a law that basically required that anyone who owed any outstanding legal financial obligation, fines and fees, court costs, or restitution, have to satisfy those financial debts before they're eligible to register to vote. So they're basically saying your sentence is not complete until you pay up, right? And so there were some of those folks that was in this local county jail that did have outstanding fines and fees. And because of that, they're charged, and they're all charged with a felony offense. Some of them with more than one count, and each of those counts carry, I think, a maximum of 5 years, right? But if these people have a prior conviction, they may, the judge may lean more towards the 5 years than probation, whatever. But they shouldn't even get a conviction, right? And, as a litigator, as a legal expert in democracy.
I wouldn't go that far, but.
Well, you are. Wait a minute, because, we got Dr. Lautier here, right? But you also have a JD, right? And I think last time I checked, that stands for Juris Doctorate.
That's right.
So you are a doctor of law, right? So as a legal doctor, right, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think it's a travesty. I mean, and tragedy as well, because, some folks voted in the villages and they got a slap on the wrist. And I don't know that even any of them served any time. So to have these folks, I think, just to be clear, I am not a criminal defense attorney, and I have, not representing anyone that is in this unfortunate situation at this moment, although I am super interested and committed to finding out more to figure out how we may address these things. My fear and sense is that it's going to happen again. And unfortunately, I mean, to read into the intent of the individual who was doing research on these issues, why? The question is why. After a historic win in Amendment 4 and the implementation, why is this being done? And the only conclusion that anyone with any understanding of how these things move is to chill the voters who actually may be eligible to vote and who have been impacted, who are returning citizens, who now find themselves thinking, I think the first gentleman who was convicted is serving a concurrent sentence, but I think he got 3 years. And what message is that sending out to individuals? And what can we do about it now? And I think that that's the position that we find ourselves. Anyone in this space is what can we do about this now?
And one of the things that I think is important too to note is that the fact that these people who are being charged, right, they're not just black, right, or African American, and that there are some folks who are white that's also being charged, and they're not just people who registered Democrats. There were some folks that made that list that registered as Republicans, and so I mean I see this as, not necessarily an attack against Democrats or attack against blacks, but attack against access to democracy, right? That anybody, whether they're Democrat or Republican, white, black, or whatever, should be able to have access, unencumbered access to the ballot box. And these arrests seem to say that, we don't want y'all participating in democracy, and so we want to hold the threat of arrest and incarceration over your head or whatever, right, to dissuade you from participating in democracy. That's what it seems like to me. And I think that we find that, because even when you talk about the what they call the prison gerrymandering or redistricting, right? And we see, in Florida, there's a big fight about redistricting. You got the Republicans trying to gain seats. But then when you look at the progressive states, you see the same thing happening. You see in redistricting, Democrats trying to gain seats, right? And so back to what we said, in the first segment of talking about, at the end of the day, it's not about one side or the other. It's just about this system, right, that creates these environments and where folks are just trying to pick and choose who get to vote for them. And in this case, it's like folks are saying that if you have a felony conviction, we really don't want you participating in democracy.
Yep. Yeah, and I will point out that Demos is litigating SB 90, where the judge found discrimination against black voters specifically. And so, to your point, Desmond, absolutely on point. Either political party will use the levers and the tools available to them to try to manipulate outcome. And so I think that is the dangerous aspect of where I think folks' understanding of how this is used. And I agree that it is something that can be used by either political party. But at the end of the day, when you see this happening in our state, and, I'm curious to know what the response will be, the Florida legislature, but also elections officials, right, and prosecutors as it relates to this particular issue. Because I believe we have too much to lose. We gained so much by Amendment 4. I think the will of the people was powerful. That is a moment I will never forget. And to be able to use that to sustain what you did, which was democracy building in a real way, I think, we can't let this happen. We have to, I think, activate a network to assist folks that find themselves in these positions, because my concern is this going to be deepened? Is it going to be used more across the state? And what will that do to the voters who finally, after so many years, after decades of waiting, are now feeling empowered? And one of the things that I always remember from hearing you speak is how it affects recidivism. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's important, that you have to recognize that you're giving someone their humanity back in a way that is can be sustaining beyond, whatever circumstances they may find themselves in. So,
and I would just add that, obviously the folks whose desire to vote has been criminalized, that is a travesty. I would also say that there's an additional travesty in the harm that, in the Amendment 4 campaign, I remember the emphasis on love. And specifically folks talking about, if God can forgive me, why can't the state of Florida, right? And so the overwhelming numbers by which Amendment 4 passed, to me, was a celebration of the expression of public will, but also like folks' faith in the power of love and the ability to make a mistake and come back from that. Mm-hmm. And so these attacks on these folks who were really just trying to exercise their right to vote is also an attack on the faith in love and our power to redeem ourselves when we make a mistake. And so it's important to defend their right to vote, and even if they made a mistake, to support them, because the truth is we're all going to make a mistake at some point. And one of the things we've learned from Amendment 4 is that there is power in letting folks learn from what they've done and then creating a new path forward, and that we're all strengthened by that.
Wow. And you know what? I'm just listening to you talk, right? And in my head, I'm wondering if there's parallels to what just happened with Roe v. Wade, right? Where now women are going to be criminalized, right? And I think in some cases what I'm hearing is that if you help somebody like go to another state where abortion is legal, that you can actually get charged with that. And so there's going to be even more criminalization now and here's the thing, right? When women in incarceration, we know that women are the fastest growing group in incarceration and has grown by, I believe, over 800%, right, in the last decade, right? And now with Roe v. Wade being struck down, there's so much talk about now the criminalization of women as it relates to abortion. Do you see a parallel there when you talk about, that fighting for access and fighting based or driven by love, fighting for love? Is there some parallels there?
I would say so, and would love to hear what Kira thinks. But I would say that absolutely. I mean, I'm just going to say this. That nobody is excited about abortion, right? Like, people are trying to make the best decisions they can for their families and to have a life in which they can afford, the best place to live and food to put on the table and all of that. And so in the absence of the right to plan how your family grows, the state is going to have to decide what its role will be in providing for those families who will now have additional needs and demands. And so there's a parallel in that we understand that folks are fallible, that people make choices that are really difficult, and for some it's not a conflict, but for many it is. And so in those cases, I think responding with love to the need rather than criminalizing the act by which folks are trying to do the best they can, that is the way forward. That is where the parallel is, loving folks enough to walk with them as they make the best decisions they can for their families. I mean,
Kira, feel free to tell me I'm barking up the wrong tree here,
no,
right?
I mean...
But I think there is something there, and, this development is a recent development, and I think there's a lot to contemplate, and there's a lot to think through. But just listening to Carol, I just thought that maybe there is some type of a parallel there.
Well, I think absolutely, because I think in taking away that option for women and to frame it in the way that makes it fall out of healthcare, I think is something that is very important for people to remember, that the way that Roe developed was based on science. And unfortunately, the voting right, as well as the right to an abortion, which was obviously not a right, it was developed through legal case law in the negative, and voting rights is the same. There is no enshrined constitutional right to vote. And so those are big risks, and I think the American public should be, I know that I am, just furious at the fact that this is still, what are we, 2022, a conversation that we're having. And to go back to Carol's point about love and bringing it back to that, it strikes me that this decision is being made and it is really perpetuating violence to folks who cannot afford to travel to another state, who maybe don't even have healthcare as an option, and who find themselves in sort of this desperate situation where they're forced to make a decision. And I have been in conversation with women who have had their lives at risk and were being told by their, medical doctor, you're at week 18, 20, and you need to have, if you continue on with this pregnancy, your life is at risk for XYZ reasons. And those women would be in the same category that a woman, who may lack access to health care and finds themselves at this desperate time to make a decision in that way. And so it's forcing us backwards and perpetuating violence as opposed to love. And I can't think that the folks who made this decision don't understand that. But at the same time, I think it is, in my opinion, forcing a viewpoint on the American public that to me is untenable and really lacks a basic understanding of history and where we're at. And is frightening, quite honestly. And so I think that this is a call to action to anyone who cares about these issues. That means that we should deepen our work in the democracy space by everyone who cares about it. And that's the only way I'm able to get through this moment, that I'm working with Carol, that I work with the team, that we know you're on the field, Desmond, because otherwise I think I would be just fall into despair. But that is a reality, because once the stories start coming out, it's going to be something that people will maybe open their eyes to what the reality is, that people who lack access to health care, what they're going to be facing.
What impact is that going to have on the criminal justice system, especially when you talk about incarceration rates or, the courts, criminal courts?
I mean, I think the impact is going to be swift. I mean, you've seen the number of states that have trigger laws that are now will be moving towards criminalizing these actions. I think that you will find women, going through the criminal system without, if they are able to get a public defender. But you know what that is like. So it's just going to be.
So they're going to build new prisons or jails and stuff? I mean,
it's possible.
And then, all right, and what impact do you think it should have on how we're voting? Right, and that's a trick question. It really is, right? But let me see.
I'm going to ask Carol.
I'm going to reframe this. I'm going to reframe this. The fallout from Roe v. Wade is going to have an impact on the criminal justice system, but it's also should be opening up people's eyes into a special segment, right, of our justice system, right, that can play a role in this, right? So for the grand prize of a trip to Hawaii, what is that?
Well, I'm just going to jump in. I was kind of joking about, but I would have loved Carol to jump in as well. But there is one thing that I will say that I've also noticed as a pattern is that we have been sort of mulling over options to sort of move forward in terms of messaging. And one of the things that strikes me is that, if you go across the country and they do focus group testing on folks in different states, is that the value systems are entirely different in Nevada, from Florida to New York. And I think there was recently an article about Florida being on the lowest in terms of patriotism. So again, this goes back to narrative, right?
But it all depends on how they're viewing patriotism too, though, don't you think?
Right, absolutely. But I think my point is that I think that folks don't vote on democracy issues. I think that what drives people to actually cast or to support a candidate, and as you know, Desmond.
But what kind of candidate would they want to support now? You
would think that they would support candidates that align with their value system, and that's what you would think would drive folks to the polls. But my understanding, and again, our work is nonpartisan, so we do not do the work of political strategists, but my understanding is that people tend more to vote, their driving force is economy and fear. So if you make lack of criminal enforcement, that may drive folks to vote.
So for the tough on crime folks.
Correct.
Right? Even though we know that tough on crime rhetoric, it doesn't even work. Right? But there's another segment, right? And the other segment, or the other group of folks that people ought to be looking at more often now is judges, right? It's judges. When you look at local races, the ones that get the least attention are judicial races, right? And for the most part, when you talk about trial court judge, when you talk about appellate judge, right? When you talk about, the federal judges, or you talk about, Supreme Court justices, right? for the most part, most of them, definitely all of trial court judges have to be elected. But to be an appellate judge, right, you have to first be like a trial court judge, right? And that's like a farm system. And so I believe that, the fallout from Roe v. Wade will open people's eyes as to cause them to pay closer attention to judicial races. It's vitally important. And so one of the things that we're doing, that we're looking to do at FRC is launching an education campaign around, judicial races, not like leaning towards any candidate or whatever, but just making people aware that, listen, you need to think that voting for a judge is just as important, if not more important, than voting for the president of the United States.
That's right.
Right? And so we're starting this a campaign. We're going to launch it real soon to do that, to educate. And I think that is vital. When you look at the number of federal judges that have been appointed, and they're appointed for life, right, during the last election cycle, prior to the last election cycle, and then look at how many have been appointed since you've had President Biden in office. He's not nowhere near the number that was appointed when President Trump was in office, right? All of those things play a role, and folks really need to, I think, really have to start talking about that. That's vitally important because we have, and you correct me if I'm wrong, they're like, what they call it, the system, the checks and balances. No, the checks and balances. We got three bodies, right? We have the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And those three bodies should be checking each other. But everybody's always focused on the executive and the legislative and never on the judicial branch.
That's right.
And when we ignore that and one of those two bodies take control of the judicial branch, then we're going to have some problems like we're having right now. We're living in it right now. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I mean by, if nothing else, that opens our eyes to, wait a minute, just like we're looking at congressional races, just like we're looking at presidential races, we need to be looking at judicial races and judicial appointments, right, just as closely, if not more, because they're vital, right, to keeping that checks and balances system.
Right. And it's a complicated thing. I mean, in Florida, too, they're classified as nonpartisan, so those surveys that they're sent, but even as we've seen through the nomination process for the Supreme Court justices, they go by a playbook where they're not showing their hand, and look at what we are living with today. So it's a process.
Voting has its consequences.
Absolutely.
Carol, talk to me. I need to know, because, I mean, you got to tell me one of the issues that folks can really start paying attention to that's looking at this podcast or listening to it, right? What are one of the fixes that we can do in our democracy to help shift some of this? Other than just voting, what are like, I kind of alluded to money in politics, and I think a couple other things. What is that thing that we can start paying attention to?
We can pay attention to each other. We can actually start talking to each other, right? Like alienation, separation, loneliness, right? That's driving the divisions in this country.
Wow.
So we need to actually talk enough to remember that we rise or fall together. Right?
All right. So we got some conservative folks that's listening on this podcast. What would you say to them right now? You could just look right there at them, and you say, we got to talk to each other. Show them some love. Show my conservative brothers and sisters some love.
I would say to your conservative followers that we are linked in a single garment, right? That we have a shared fate. And in order to strengthen this country and ensure that it thrives, that all of us have an opportunity to thrive, we're going to have to be a little uncomfortable and have conversations that may make us nervous, but knowing that we are strong enough to work through our differences, to identify some shared goals, and remember that it's love, right? No matter whether you're a person of faith or not, that it is our love for one another, for our families, for our communities, for this country that has been critical to every advance this country has made. And it is the lack of love that has been critical to every attempt to decimate the progress that we've made on racial justice, gender justice, economic justice. And so if you have any at all, confidence in love, whether it's God or the person with whom you share your life, then you have a responsibility to get over some of the things that you may think about folks on the other side, right? And remember that if we want to reinvest in the common good, the first step is remembering the good in ourselves and seeing the good in one another.
Wow. Man, let me tell you. You know, I was listening to you talk, and I was touched here. And in my head, one of our guests that our amazing production team was able to get was Heather McGee, you know, who used to lead Demos. And I can't think of the name of her book. I want to say The Sum of Us.
The Sum of Us.
Yeah, The Sum of Us. And she talks about this, about how we can engage in these conversations with people who may not have the same political views as we do, but we have this common bond, right, that allows us to build something so much powerful. And so listening to you speak, and I know that somebody's looking at you that probably is going to be touched or moved by what you said. And I'm like, there's no better way to end this podcast than with the love of Dr. Lautier, you know.
That's right.
And so, Carol, Kira, I want to just thank you all for being on this show. And I'm sorry Neil couldn't be here, but he's out taking care of his business. But, you know, I know he's watching somewhere. And I know that listening to you speak, Kira, I know that there were some things that probably would have gotten Neil all excited. You know, this was the type of conversation that Neil loves. And I definitely appreciate it. I really do.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Desmond.
Thank you for
We're
the
happy to be
invitation.
here.
Yeah, and being that you was bobbing your head on our theme song, you know, I figured, you know what? I might as well just play it going out until y'all can bob your head a little bit, you know?